The Vanishing of Eleanor, a psychological detective story. Chapter 1: Disappearance. Rain fell on Crouch End as if the sky were being wrung out by an unseen hand. Stephen Watterson, who had spent 2 decades learning to read storms in human lives, recognized the feel of an omen without needing to name it. He paused with his keys in the lock and listened. The townhouse behind the door was too quiet. No radio murmuring in the kitchen, no faint clatter from Eleanor's tea mug, no soft shuffle of her slippers on the hallway floorboards. He opened the door. Her pale wool coat hung exactly where she always left it. The hollow of its collar, the slight tilt of the hanger, a detail that didn't fit with absence. "Eleanor," he called, shaking rain from his cuffs. Silence pressed on him as if it were weight. He kicked off his shoes and moved to the dining room, where a single lamp cast a cone of lemon-colored light across the table. Her sketchbook lay open. Graphite lines traced a portrait on the verge of breath. Eyes begun, hair hinted, mouth only a smudge of intention. He touched the page lightly, still slightly warm from the lamp. He opened the kitchen drawer looking for a tea bag and found her phone instead, face down, battery half full. It bloomed to life with his touch. A missed call from Miranda, 2 emails. One email subject read, "Please talk to me when you come home." Time-stamped 8:19 p.m. He checked the rooms, the bathroom, the study, the guest room. The bed had an Eleanor shape pressed into one side, long cooled. At first he did what he did for clients. The routine had comfort. He glanced at the time, 23:12, and told himself measuredly that adults were not considered missing for 24 hours. He made tea that he did not drink. He sat, coat still on, and dialed through the mental checklist. Call the neighbors, check local hospitals, check the bus routes. He felt like an actor playing a familiar part, executing the choreography with all the right gestures and none of the right belief. By 1 a.m., he was standing under the awning of the corner shop, rain needling his cheekbones while he scanned the CCTV monitor behind the till. "Mid-evening," the board clerk said. "Lots of folks, I can look, but the view's rubbish. It's more bin than street." He watched pixelated phantoms pass through the gray wash of drizzle and fluorescent flicker. Umbrellas opening like bruised flowers. A cyclist bending into the wind. A figure that might have been Eleanor in a hooded coat, or might have been any woman in North London at night. By 3 a.m. back home, he sat in the study staring at their wedding photo. Eleanor looked into the camera with unfeigned happiness, unpretended, unposed. He could not imagine her not existing. He could not imagine a house without her breath in it. He promised her portrait with the solemnity of a prayer. "I will find you." His phone buzzed. A new email icon appeared from Eleanor, time-stamped earlier that evening but delayed by poor reception or fate. He clicked. "You don't see me anymore. I'm right here and you don't see me." He stared at the glowing text until the words shimmered. He checked for another email and found it sitting just beneath, time-stamped 8:52 p.m. "There's something darker in you each night." A third email had only the first line typed, "I'm afraid," nothing more. He told himself it was a mood, a bad day, a thread pulled by stress that would be sewn back in the morning. He told himself many things until the telling became a soft, steady murmur that let him sleep for a single hour in the chair, head tilted back, mouth open in the way of the dying. Chapter 2, First Steps. Morning came without sunlight, the gray unbroken, as if the world had been sealed beneath wax paper. Stephen shaved with the small mirror propped on the window sill because the bathroom mirror fogged too quickly, and because he had begun to dislike seeing his face filling a whole pane. The sound of the blade on stubble grounded him. The routine kept panic at tolerable levels. He called Eleanor's sister in Brighton. He called the gallery where Eleanor volunteered, sent Albans Community and Modern Arts, a name that sounded like a compromise between parish and financier. Miranda met him in the gallery office, the small cube of space smelling faintly of coffee and fresh paint. She was tall, angular, with a severe fringe and anxious hands. Her face softened when she saw him, then tightened in the way of people deciding not to say a thing they want to say. "She was here yesterday," Miranda said. "She left at 7. She seemed preoccupied." "Preoccupied," Stephen repeated too curtly. "She said she needed to talk to you, that she was frightened." Miranda looked at him as if expecting something to happen, a confession, a shout, a denial to the rafters. "Frightened of what?" He forced his voice to professional flatness. "We receive threats sometimes because of my work, cases, enemies. It may be nothing." "Not that." Miranda's hands, already anxious, twisted further. "She said she didn't feel safe at home." The words arranged themselves in the air between them and refused to disperse. Stephen thought of the careful rituals of their evenings, the 2 mugs of tea, Eleanor moving barefoot from table to sink, her slender wrist balancing a plate on her fingertips. He thought of how civilized and ordinary it all was. He thought of the emails he had read in the night and felt humiliation slide under his collar and claw at his neck. "She was upset," he said, not sure if he was explaining something to Miranda or to himself. Upset people sometimes speak in metaphors. Miranda's gaze was too steady. Sometimes they don't. He prowled the gallery's corridors in a sudden, unfocused need for movement, nodding at canvases he barely saw, noticing reflexively the placement of security cameras, the lines of sight, the blind spots. An old habit. Where could someone hide? What could someone do unseen? The questions echoed, unsettlingly misapplied in a space of open, white walls and color. After the gallery, he tried the cafe on the corner. Luca, who had seen Eleanor almost daily for years and never used anyone's surname, dried a cup with unnecessary force. "She was upset last week," Luca said. "Came in before closing, hands shaking. She asked if she could sit in the back for a bit." "Did she say why?" Stephen kept his hand steady around his coffee. He did not drink it. "She said you had an argument." Luca looked at him apologetically. "I told her to go home and talk to you like adults do." "What night?" Stephen heard his voice change, cooler, investigative, stepping into a groove worn by years of cases. He preferred it to the other voice threatening to emerge, the private one, thick with a feeling that had no use. "Tuesday," Luca's towel slowed. "No, Monday. The rain started then." He walked home slowly, taking the long way that sent him past the church and the schoolyard, as if distance could thin the density of the day. The house watched him as he approached. He tried the door and was briefly surprised to find it unlocked, though he had not locked it that morning. The kitchen was as he had left it. The coffee cup in the sink bore his lips' faint ring. He felt a peculiar need to tidy, an urge to scrub all surfaces to shining clarity. He opened the cleaning cupboard. A nearly new bottle of bleach stood on the shelf. Eleanor hated the smell of bleach. She used vinegar, baking soda, stubborn patience. He made himself close the cupboard door and swallow the thought that rose like bile. He took out his notebook and began a timeline. He wrote what he knew on the left, what he suspected in the middle, and what he feared on the right. The right-hand column stayed nearly empty because his hand refused to write the one sentence it contained. The doorbell rang. Mrs. Green from 2 houses down stood on the step, cardigan buttoned wrong, eyes bright with the virtuous dread of bearing bad news. "I didn't want to bother you," she said, uninvited but already moving forward. "But I thought, if it were my daughter—" Yes, Stephen's patience was a worn rope. I don't know, I heard voices, Monday night. Raised voices, late. "People argue," he said, and hated himself for the texture of the words, the cheapness, the commonness. Her mouth tightened. It sounded like someone was crying. He thanked her and closed the door gently, as if gentleness now could earn him retroactive credit. That evening he stood under the shower until the tank shuddered empty. As water drummed his scalp, a feeling grew, not fear exactly, not guilt, not yet, but an anticipatory grief, a shape forming in fog. When he stepped out, the mirror had cleared. For a second in the glass he saw the shape of a woman behind him, blurred by steam, hair dark against pale skin. He turned so fast he caught his toe on the bath mat and stumbled. The room was empty. In the mirror, only him. "Sleep, Stephen," he said aloud, as if issuing an order to a reluctant recruit. "Sleep, and the world will be more ordinary in the morning." Chapter 3. Old Cases Bleeding Through. He did not sleep. He had slept through much in his life, stakeouts in cars, the hour before dawn, sometimes even as his own marriage unspooled. But he could not sleep now. He turned on the desk lamp in the study, the same halo of light that had burnished Eleanor's sketchbook the night before she vanished, and began to work the case against the absence raw. He laid out files. He drew a map of the neighborhood, marking CCTV locations known and guessed. He wrote the names of men who hated him in fat marker on index cards and turned them over one by one. Old grudges often rattle their chains when an opportunity to haunt arises. Henry Mallory's name stayed face up. Henry, whom Stephen had exposed 5 years earlier for an arson string disguised as insurance accidents. Henry, who had glared with those small, humid eyes as the cuffs bent his wrists. Henry, who had once muttered as the van door closed, "We all get ours, Watterson." Stephen pulled Mallory's last known address from the file. He was out, paroled for good behavior into a bedsit off Seven Sisters, a neighborhood of peeling paint and cheap kebabs. Stephen drove without turning the radio on. The wipers sketched their mechanical arc. Outside, the city wore last night's dark as a new skin. He found Henry in a narrow alley, smoke curling from his hand like an old habit. Stephen stepped close enough to smell the nicotine ghosting Henry's breath. "Watterson," Henry said, smiling without warmth, "to what do I owe the haunting?" "My wife's gone missing." Henry's smile faltered. He slid an eye over Stephen, measuring. "And you came to me for what? A monologue, an apology, sympathy." "You told me I'd get mine." The old anger rose and surprised him with its heat. "You said that. Did you touch my house?" Henry studied the lit end of his cigarette. "If I'd done something to your wife, I'd be 6 counties away by now." He flicked ash with theatrical delicacy. "You're looking in the wrong direction, detective. You usually look outward, try inward." "Is that a threat?" "It's a mirror," Henry said, turning the cigarette to watch it burn. "You don't think you pick up the stink of the things you chase? Go home, scrub yourself, see what comes off." Stephen left him in the alley, heart steady, step even, face disciplined. Inside, something had begun to quiver, a string drawn too taut. Back in Crouch End, he downloaded the last week of motion alerts from their doorbell camera, a device he had never liked but allowed because it reassured Eleanor when he was away. The memory card was blank where there should have been a night's worth of rectangles, a gap from Monday 18:00 to Tuesday 03:00. He stared at the empty indicator, then at the lens, small, glossy, indifferent. He opened the laptop and pulled up the emails again. He looked for something he had missed. He looked for himself. He found a folder he didn't recognize, voice drafts. Inside, audio files titled only with dates. He double-clicked. Eleanor's voice filled the room. "Calm, too calm. I'm trying to find words that will make him hear. I keep failing. He's not cruel. He's gone. He is here, but he's a room I can't enter." Stephen sat very still. A hum rose in the air, electricity maybe, or blood. He clicked another. "I shouldn't record this. It feels like betrayal. But I don't know who he brings back into the house each night. It smells like smoke and rain and people he won't name. He thinks I don't see the way his hands tremble sometimes." He paused the file and noticed his hand trembling. He went to the kitchen to steady himself and opened the drawer for a cloth. The blade he reached past caught the light with a tiny, ridiculous flash. It was one of a matched set he and Eleanor had chosen together, the kind of domestic purchase that had felt like a flag planted, like home. He could not remember the last time he had sharpened them. He could not remember the last time he had chopped anything with her in the room. He closed the drawer. He opened the cellar door. The scent hit him first, old wood damp, a tang of iron. He flicked on the bare bulb and went down. The cellar had always been Eleanor's least favorite space. She complained the air there felt unresolved. He had laughed at the word then, and like so many things they had laughed at, it now stood up in his memory and refused to sit down again. He moved crates that had not been moved in years. He shifted a basket of linen offcuts Eleanor used for rags. Beneath, in the angle where the stairs met the wall, he found the soft shock of fabric. The scarf was one he had bought her last winter at a Christmas market, threaded with indigo and gold. He pulled it free. The indigo had darkened irregularly along one edge. He did not need to raise it to his nose to know the stain. He did because people do. He stood with the scarf in his hands and felt the cellar narrow. For a moment, his mind reached for the familiar idea of framed suspects and footprints. It reached the idea and found only itself. He folded the scarf carefully along its stained edge and carried it upstairs as if he were carrying someone sleeping. He laid it on the dining table, on top of the sketchbook. He sat in the chair and did not move for a very long time. Chapter 4: Crosshairs. He went to the gallery again, because he could not bear to be in the house with the scarf a minute longer, and because people in galleries speak softly and move as if they understand that sound carries weight. Miranda opened her office door before he knocked. "You shouldn't be here," she said immediately. "The police called me." "Good," he said. "Then you've told them whatever you think you know." "I told them what Eleanor told me." "And what did she tell you specifically?" He hated how he sounded. It was the tone he used with reluctant witnesses. It had no business in this room. Exact words matter. Miranda hesitated. The radiator hissed. She said she was frightened to sleep. She said she woke up and he was not himself. She said once she found him at the sink, washing his hands, and he looked at her like she was a stranger. Stephen closed his eyes. The sink. He had washed his hands in the middle of the night recently. He remembered the sound of water and the sense that something on his skin was not meant to be there. He had thought, case residue, phantom dust from a scene, the normal contamination of his work that always came off with soap if not with scripture. Did she mention anyone else? A man, a donor. He seized that lifeline greedily. Adrian Cross. I saw his name on the donor plaque. Miranda looked surprised. Mr. Cross is generous. He and his partner collect. He met Eleanor once at an opening, if you're implying. I am implying nothing. He was implying everything. He saw in his mind the way Eleanor smiled when someone asked her about her art, and he forced the image into a neutral shape because he could not endure it otherwise. Would you give me his contact? She did reluctantly. He left the gallery without looking at the canvases. Outside, the rain had stopped, leaving the pavement black and brilliantly reflective. London used to look hopeful to him after rain, scrubbed, reset. Now it looked like something that had been polished for a funeral. Adrian Cross lived in a flat that was more glass than walls. He answered the door in a cardigan that cost more than Stephen's watch and held out a hand with a collector's assurance. "This is unexpected," Adrian said, ushering him to a low chair. "We've heard. I'm sorry." "You met my wife?" "Yes, at a group show. She was kind and her critiques were precise without cruelty, a rare gift." He poured coffee into cups like thimbles. "Is there anything I can do?" "Answer a question without dissembling." He did not smile. "Was there anything between you and Eleanor?" Adrian blinked and then laughed, not insulted but delighted. "No. She engaged my partner about his awful taste in sculpture at some length, if that counts." "I keep trying to move the picture in my head," Stephen said, surprising himself by saying the thought aloud. "I look for someone placed near her by chance or design, and each time I step back, the frame encloses only my house." "Then you must choose what you believe about yourself," Adrian said, unhelpful to the point of cruelty. Either you are the man who finds the missing or you are something else. He set his cup down. His tone softened. Grief distorts, even anticipatory grief. It makes you a stranger to your own hands. Stephen stood. I am not grieving, he said too quickly. I am investigating. He walked until his legs ached. He walked past men smoking in doorways and women leaning into the wind, and a child kneeling on the sidewalk to tie a shoelace with solemn absorption. He walked back to his street like a man returning to finish a task. Inside, the air smelled faintly of bleach. He checked his hands, which smelled of coffee and rain. He went to the drawer of the small desk where he kept things that needed hiding, an old reflex he hadn't questioned since he was 23, and learned that a second life sits invisibly under the first if you know where to place it. He found cloth white, folded, and something wrapped inside it with the blunt weight of a tool. He unrolled it and managed to be both prepared and shocked. The knife was one of the matched set. A brownish line along the join of blade and hilt, a crescent shape, as if from a thumb along the guard. He sat down on the floor right where he was. He set the knife beside him and looked at it as one looks at a sleeping animal one is afraid to startle. That night Eleanor came again to the foot of the bed. He saw her as clearly as he had ever seen any person in his life. The mole beneath her left eye, the white line of an old scar on her forearm from a kitchen accident when they first moved in together, the way she held herself when she wanted to say a dangerous thing and didn't. He reached out. His hand passed through air. She opened her mouth. He heard only water, the steady notch and fall of rain. He woke with his throat raw as if he had been shouting, and the clock blinked 04, 07, and somewhere in the house a pipe knocked like someone at a door. Chapter 5. Pressure. The police came at dawn. They did not quarter the house or break things, as in the shows. They were careful. They were observant. They were shyly apologetic in the way of civil servants asked to perform indecency in a neighbor's sitting room. Detective Inspector Patel led. He was a man whose clothes fit too neatly to be vain, and whose eyes were too honest to enjoy his work this morning. D.C. Hargreaves hung back, polite to the point of invisibility, taking notes with the hard, quick attention of a younger man who knows he is being watched for competence. Mr. Watterson, Patel said, we'd like to ask some questions. You understand we're obliged. He nodded. He showed them the scarf. He showed them the knife. The relief he felt in showing anyone something, surprised him and made him feel like a coward. This is significant, Patel said quietly. Do you have any explanation for how these came to be where they were? No, Stephen said. Not one that doesn't ruin my life. They asked good questions. What did they argue about Monday? When had he last seen Eleanor alive? Had he left the house? Were there cameras? Where did the gap in the footage come from? He answered with the precision of a man who knew exactly how this transcript would be read by a judge one day. We'll need to take these, Patel said, gesturing to the knife and the scarf. We'll also need to swab. Hargreaves dusted the door frame and the banister for prints and swabbed under Stephen's nails with a gentleness that felt like pity. They sprayed luminol in the kitchen and the hallway and waited, lights off, for the cold bloom of blue. It came. It came in faint, reluctant blossoms along the skirting board and pooled like memory near the kitchen sink. Patel did not look triumphant, he looked tired. Luminol can react to a lot of things, he said. Cleaners, oxidizers. Bleach, Stephen said. Yes, Patel said, bleach. Eleanor hates bleach, Stephen said, and the sentence was so useless, so untranslatable into the language of evidence, that he laughed, then stopped himself. Mr. Watterson, Patel said softer, is there anyone we should call for you? My wife, Stephen said, and then, no, there's no one. They took him to the station, not in cuffs, in a car that smelled of French fries and something lemon-scented. He watched North London pass through the window and felt the peculiar, lucid calm that sometimes descends on people in the middle of braking. In the interview room, he sat where he had been a dozen times with clients and suspects and men whose guilt fit them like skin. He placed his palms flat on the table and saw how steady they were. I think I killed her, he said before Patel could ask his first question. Patel's pen hovered. Why do you think that, Mr. Watterson? Stephen told them about the scarf, the knife, the gap in the footage, the emails, the audio files, the dreams, the smell of bleach, the way the house felt when he walked into it, as if something in it had learned his name and was waiting to use it. He told them what Mrs. Green had heard, what Luca had said. He told them what Miranda believed. He told them what Henry had pointed at, the mirror turned cruelly inward. When did you last sleep properly? Patel asked unexpectedly. I don't know, Stephen said. Before. He pressed his fingers to his eyelids until colors fizzed and danced. When I sleep, she comes. Many people dream of missing loved ones, Patel said. It was the kindest sentence anyone had said to him all week, and it made him want to lean forward and ask the inspector to tell it to him again, slowly, like a prayer. They released him without charge late that afternoon. The street outside the station was the wrong color. He realized it was only evening and felt cheated. The day had lasted a century and deserved to be over. He went home and stood in the hallway and listened. The house made its small sounds, the fridge motor, the tick of the clock, the secret expansion and contraction of wood. He took off his shoes. He placed his phone and keys in the bowl on the console table as he always did, and the deeply ordinary sound of keys touching ceramic undid him. He leaned his forehead against the cool plaster wall and closed his eyes. When he opened them, it was dark. He had slid down the wall and fallen asleep on the floor like a child. He stood carefully. He turned on the hallway light and saw that the front door was open 2 inches. He closed it. He tested the latch. He tried to reconstruct whether he had left it open or someone had opened it. He failed. Enough, he said aloud to no one. He went into the study and opened his notebook to the timeline. He filled the right-hand column with a single sentence. I killed Eleanor on Monday night in our kitchen. He stared at the sentence a long time. Then he crossed it out. Then he wrote it again underneath. Chapter 6, The Marsh. On Thursday he woke with the deep, unreasonable certainty that he had buried her in the marsh. He did not know which marsh. He did not know why a marsh and not a river or a landfill or the deep woods of fiction. He knew only that his feet needed to be in mud, that his hands needed to be cold, that he needed to stand in a place where the ground swallowed things. He drove to Walthamstow wetlands because it was nearest, and because it had been the site of a minor case years ago that had ended in a duck pond and a fight that tore his coat. He walked the path past the reservoirs, past a sign warning that the earth here was not to be trusted, that the banks were dangerous. He stepped off the path into the reeds and sank to the ankle. He stood there and waited for his mind to produce an image with enough definition to guide his body forward. Wind moved in the rushes with the sound of pages turning. He smelled decaying plant and algae and water that had been still too long. He looked down and saw his shoes vanish into a brown that was too alive to be dirt. "What are you doing?" a voice called from the path. A ranger in a green jacket waved. "You can't go there, it's not safe." "I know," Stephen said, "I know." He climbed back onto the path awkwardly, as if learning to walk. He wiped his hands on his coat without thinking and left pale streaks across the wool. Back at the car, he stared at his mud-caked shoes and was seized by a violent desire to hide them. He placed them in the boot under an old blanket. Then he stood very still and watched himself do this in his memory, on a loop, and could not tell whether the memory was of the moment that had just occurred or of another, earlier hiding of another, worse thing. He drove to a big box store on the ring road and bought a second pair of the same shoes. The cashier smiled with the mild curiosity of people who see inexplicable purchases all day. He put the new shoes on in the car and drove home, where he placed them in the hallway in the exact way he thought his old ones had used to sit. He stood back and assessed the tableau like a set dresser. He hated what he was doing. He could not stop doing it. He went into the bathroom and washed his hands for a long time. When he looked up, he saw Eleanor behind him in the mirror. He did not turn around. He watched her in the glass. She lifted her hand and placed it on his shoulder. He felt nothing on his skin and everything everywhere else. He closed his eyes. When he opened them, the bathroom contained only him. He called his GP and in a tone that surprised him with its sudden cordiality, asked for a referral. "It's for sleep, and for something else." "You've not been in for 5 years, Mr. Watterson," the receptionist said. "We've missed you." He laughed inappropriately. "I haven't noticed," he said, then apologized because she did not deserve his bitterness. He wrote down the name of a therapist with neat Swedish letters in it and made an appointment for the following week, as if he might still be a person planning for the future. Chapter 7: The Therapist. Dr. Halvorson's room was designed to prevent confession and to encourage it. The furniture declared, "Sit." The colors declared, "You cannot hurt me, try." The window let in a shaft of winter light that had no warmth. Stephen sat on the edge of the sofa and placed his hands on his knees where he could see them. He did not trust them. "Tell me why you're here," Dr. Halvorson said, in a tone that implied he could answer with silence and be understood. "My wife is missing," Stephen said, "and I think I killed her." He watched her face and saw no flinch, which felt both offensive and kind. "I also think I am a man who would never do that. The two thoughts alternate so quickly I feel nauseous." "What happens when you let both thoughts be true at once?" the doctor asked. "My chest hurts," he said. "I want to run until I can't hear my heart anymore." You investigate for a living. How do you investigate yourself? I assemble evidence, he said. I'm good at seeing what's there and not what I wish were there. I used to be good at that. Now I can't tell the difference. I find a knife in a drawer and I don't know if I put it there or if I am being, he groped for a word big enough, eaten. By what? He stared at the patterned rug. By the version of me I have avoided for years. The one that comes home with other people's grief under his fingernails and doesn't wash it off. Do you drink? She asked, not accusatory, only practical. Not as much as I could, he said. Not as little as I should. Do you sleepwalk? I do now. He told her about Eleanor in the mirror. He told her about the marsh. He did not tell her about the way his hands sometimes moved before his thoughts did, because the sentence frightened him more than the rest. Hallucinations can emerge under extreme stress and deprivation, Dr. Havorson said, softly, like placing a hand on a fevered forehead. They don't always indicate madness. What do you want? To go back, he said, to a day when I was just late for dinner and she was annoyed and teasing, and I said something clever that made her forgive me. We cannot go back, she said gently, and he wanted to tell her that the sentence should not be said that way with that much care. It should be delivered like a verdict, clean and cruel, so at least the world would be consistent. Then I want to find her, he said, even if I am the reason she cannot be found. She nodded once, and he felt seen in a way that was both relief and a flaying. We will speak again. She wrote something on a card and slid it to him. If you find yourself about to do harm, call this number. She held his gaze. To yourself or to others? I already did harm, he said, and stood, and left before the neat Swedish letters could rearrange themselves into a word for what he had become. Chapter 8: The Doorbell. He spent Friday night assembling a ghost. He took the doorbell camera apart, a device that had resisted days of battery swaps and resets, and had probably laughed, in its little lens way, at his attempts to coax memory out of it. He pried gently along the seam and found the memory card, a cookie-thin rectangle he slid into the laptop with the anticipation of a man presenting a bone to a dog and praying. He ran a file recovery tool he used in cases where clients deleted things that hurt. The progress bar filled like tide. A list of files appeared, more than the blank gap would suggest. He began to click, one by one, hair prickling along his arms as if the static of the loading screen had reached out of the machine and stroked him. He watched a flurry of footage, packages delivered, Mrs. Green's cat performing its nightly claim to his front step. Then Monday 21:13, there he was, Stephen leaving the house. He wore his raincoat, he carried nothing. He returned at 21:47. He carried something wrapped in a canvas drop cloth, rectangular, the size of a picture frame. He could not tell whether the something inside was heavy. His body looked ordinary, no hunch, no strain. He paused on the step and looked at the street with the careful nothing of someone who has decided to appear ordinary. He went inside. At 22:36, the door opened again. Stephen came out with the drop cloth wrapped around something different, longer, narrower. He held it to his side like a rolled rug. He walked to the car. He put the package in the boot. He looked at the house for a long second like a man practicing goodbye. He scrubbed through. At 02:59, the door opened a crack and closed again. At 03:14, Eleanor appeared for the first time that day in the frame as if conjured. She wore a white t-shirt and leggings, no shoes. She stood on the step and looked at the street as if it had just told her a joke in a language she wished she spoke. She looked back into the house and then up at the sky. She stepped down, hesitated, turned, and went back inside. He paused the video and put his forehead down on the desk. He did not cry. He did not make any sound at all. He felt the slow, careful disassembly of his mind, screws placed in neat rows, plate lifted, dust exposed. He rewound to 21:47, the first re-entry with the rectangle. He enlarged the frame until pixels became blocks. The rectangle had a white border visible at the edge of the cloth. The cloth slipped as he shifted to key the lock, and he saw not the corner of a frame but a sliver of something else, off-white, fibrous, like plasterboard. He stood so quickly his chair tipped. He knew what he had done then, not with facts, but with a rising certainty that the body recognizes before language. He went to the cellar with a torch he had not used since their power went out last winter, and he had felt briefly like a hero for finding it in the dark. He examined the wall beneath the stairs where he had found the scarf. He ran his hand along the skirting. He tapped with his knuckles and listened. Vid vita vox. He had learned as a boy that a wall tells you whether it is hollow. He found a patch that sounded too thin. He touched the paint and saw a smear that was not quite color-matched, newer, glossier. He pressed his thumb to the join where the skirting met the board and felt a faint give where no give should be. He went upstairs and took the matched knife set's paring knife, the smallest blade doing the dirtiest work, and returned to the cellar. He slid the point along the seam, careful. He pried. He listened. He stopped twice to breathe because he could not get air deep enough. The board came away with a human sigh. Behind it, darkness and the smell, sharp, sweet, wrong. Eleanor, he said, the name a breath and a denial. He did not shine the torch in the hollow. He put the board back. He pressed it into place with the flat of his hand until the world became a tunnel, and then became dark, and then became nothing. Chapter 9: The Finding. He woke on the cellar steps. His head throbbed with the steady pulse of punishment. Light angled thinly through the coal chute pane. He stood, swayed, grabbed the banister as if the house were trying to shake him off. He called Patel. He did not imagine for once how his words would sound. "You need to come," he said. "Send a team." Patel arrived with more care and more noise this time. They sealed the doorway with polite tape. They spoke in clipped phrases that had no room for sentiment. They took the board away not with a knife, but with a tool meant for taking boards away from places where boards should not be. Stephen stood in the kitchen and stared at the blue transferware plate on the wall where Eleanor had once said she loved the little crack in the glaze because it made the plate honest. He heard the movement of people under the stairs. He heard someone say, "Here," and someone else say, "Careful," and then silence in the particular register of discovery. Patel did not come to tell him. He did not need to. He already knew. Still, when Patel stood in the doorway to the kitchen, something in Stephen inclined toward him like a compass needle, as if the man could point to any direction that had not already been walked to death. "We found her," Patel said. He did not try to make the sentence bigger or safer. "I'm sorry." Stephen nodded. It seemed a normal-sized gesture in a room where everything else had grown monstrously large or very small. He put his hand on the counter to steady himself, and felt his fingers find the familiar roughs and smooths in the wood where Eleanor's ring had once nicked it, where he always stopped a mug, as if the counter were something that could be taught a lesson. "She is intact," Patel said quietly. "There is no," he stopped. "We will be as respectful as possible." "Don't be," Stephen said, and meant, "be efficient. Be the opposite of me. Do not let the house charm you. Do not let her make you gentle." "Mr. Watterson," Patel began. "Stephen," he said, because it always sounded humanizing in interviews, and because he needed to feel like a human now, if only to taste the irony. "Stephen," Patel said, "do you want?" He shook his head. He did not want. Wanting belonged to a previous life. He looked past Patel to the doorway to the hall. He imagined Eleanor walking through it. The image assembled itself too easily, as if it had been rehearsed in him for years against exactly this event. The forensic team worked for hours. The house changed around them without looking different. They carried their carefulness like a cloak that he wanted to rip off them and also wrap around himself. When it was done, there was tape on doors and a hush like after snow. Patel sat with him at the dining table. The sketchbook still lay open. Someone had placed the scarf on the back of a chair, as if they had decided that the table was too sacred a surface and had not known why. Patel looked at the page. "She was good," he said simply. "Yes," Stephen said. The word came from a place lower in his body than his voice box. "She was." "We'll take you in," Patel said. "You know the process. This part will be ugly." "Ugly is honest," Stephen said. He looked at Eleanor's sketchbook. She had drawn his face 100 times and never finished it, always leaving some line open. He understood something then about art that he had never cared to learn, that to finish is sometimes to close a door, and that some doors, if you close them, seal too well. He stood. "Let's go," he said, and finding that the phrase could be said about this as well as about dinner, as well as about a weekend, as well as about marriage, he almost laughed and didn't. Chapter 10: The Room. The interview room was the same as Thursday and also entirely different. He sat and did not place his hands on the table this time. He placed them in his lap like a schoolboy waiting his turn to read. "Stephen," Patel said, using his first name as if it might build a bridge across a gorge. "Tell me Monday." He told him Monday. He told him about the argument that began with nothing, laundry, a bill, the silence he had taught the house to use, and then turned into their old argument, the one that had old grooves and old splinters. Eleanor had said he was not present. He had said he was tired. She had said he brought his cases into their bed like stray dogs and asked her to admire the fleas. He had said she did not understand what it takes, what it took, to stare into rot and stay clean. She had laughed then, a sound he had loved once because it had been warm and teasing, and the laugh had sounded like a weapon to his tired mind. "She said there is blood in your dreams," he said, and Patel's pen stopped for a second and then continued. She went to the sink, Stephen said. He could see it, but the edges blurred as if looking at a photograph printed on too soft paper. She turned on the tap. She cried without noise. She did that when she didn't want to give me the satisfaction of knowing, and even in that sentence you can hear what I am. I stood very still. I don't remember picking up the knife. I remember it in my hand. I remember the room narrowing to the width of a blade. I remember the sound of water and a sound that may have been me. I remember. He stopped, because his body had begun to tremble with the precise frequency of a coming collapse. Patel did not shift forward in pity. He let the silence become a container into which the rest could be poured. I remember lifting her, Stephen said. I remember the weight being both more and less than a person. I remember the drop cloth and the board and the smell of plaster and the smell of not plaster, and I remember thinking, if I can do this part, then I can undo all of it. As if one competence could absolve another sin. I remember the word undo beating like a heart in my head. He spoke until the room contained a single story. The story did not absolve. It did not explain. It did the only thing stories can do when fact has already spoken. It arranged things so that a human could stand them. Patel nodded once at the end, not in approval, and not in gratitude for a solved case, and not in the relief of paperwork made simpler, but in the small, human way of a person, acknowledging that another person has just done the hardest thing he will ever do and has not died from it. "We will charge you," Patel said. "Your solicitor." "I don't want," he began, then stopped. Wanting belonged to a previous life. Give me someone who is competent and not cruel. Patel nodded. I know one or two. They processed him. He stood for the camera. He held a board with his name on it and thought of all the names he had held in his mind, all the men he had called by their surnames for years, all the times he had been careful not to let a name become a person, because then a person becomes permitted to move you. He lay on a thin mattress and stared at a ceiling that had seen more men than any church. He closed his eyes. Eleanor came to him then, not at the foot of the bed this time, not silent. She leaned close, and he smelled her hair, which had always smelled faintly of the rosemary she grew despite the London sun's reluctance. She whispered. The words were clear and merciless. "You finally found me." He woke with his face wet, and his mouth open, as if he had been saying her name on a loop, until the universe allowed him to sleep again. Chapter 11. After. He pled. His solicitor, who was competent and not cruel, advised him on words and their consequences. The words moved through rooms and acquired weights and turned into numbers, and then into years. He listened and nodded where appropriate. He thought of clocks and kitchen counters and a white scarf with indigo, and he did not think of the marsh because the marsh had been a lie his mind told to spare him the cellar. Miranda came once to a hearing and sat at the back. She did not speak to him. He was grateful for that because he could not have taken gentleness from her. Lucas sent a card with a small drawing of a coffee cup on the front and a single sentence inside. "I am sorry for everything that led you to this table." Mrs. Green left a plant on his doorstep, which his solicitor retrieved and delivered to his sister with the sentence, "I think this is meant for someone else now." Adrian Cross sent a check to the gallery in Eleanor's name, and the plaque under a small, sharp painting of Rain read, in memory of a woman who saw honestly. In the cell, he wrote, he did not keep a diary in the way of men writing toward redemption. He made lists. He made timelines. He wrote the story of Monday in 15 different tenses and kept all of them because each was true in its own particular way. He wrote the sentence, "I loved her," in various arrangements until he realized the sentence had no variance. He saw Dr. Halvorson once in a room that had been made to feel like not a prison. He thought of the way rooms can be made to lie politely. He told her about the doorbell footage, and the board, and the moment the smell told him everything, and the way his knees failed on the stairs as if his bones had made a secret decision. "We will make a plan," she said, "because plans are the only respectable currency in rooms like that. You will learn to live alongside it." "It?" he asked, though he knew. "The part of you that did the thing," she said, and he appreciated the phrase for its carefulness. He could not have tolerated a more clinical word. He learned the routines of the place. He learned which nights were loud and which were quiet. He learned that small kindnesses acquired an obscene radiance in a place designed without them. He learned that he could live after the worst thing. He walked circles in the yard and felt parts of his body return to him, not as forgiven territory, but as land surveyed and labeled on a map. He held Eleanor in his mind not as a ghost, but as a person whose absence now had a shape that could be touched without shattering. He imagined her painting, which she did not do with enough frequency in life, and he placed her in a room with high windows and imagined what light looked like on her hands there. And sometimes the image was too beautiful, and he forced himself to imagine the washing up instead, because ordinary grief was easier to survive than exquisite fantasy. He called his sister and listened to her cry and did not attempt to comfort her with big words. He said small ones. "I'm here," he said. "I'm alive," he said. "I'm sorry," he said, and meant it not as an admission or a ritual or a lever to move pity, but as the only sentence worth saying at the end of a story like this. Chapter 12. The Mirror. On a morning that did not announce itself as special, he woke and did not see Eleanor in the mirror. He washed his hands and saw only his hands. He found this both a relief so large he had to sit down and a loss that startled him by its keenness. He had grown used to sharing the house of his head with her, and now that she had moved farther in, to whatever rooms of time the dead occupy, he felt the echo of her footsteps recede. He touched the scar on his wrist he did not remember acquiring. He touched the soft part of his forearm where Eleanor had placed her hand on their first date, and he had, without meaning to, leaned into the touch like a plant. He said her name aloud, once. He did not ask forgiveness because he did not believe it operated on the scale he needed. He began to think carefully about the life that would follow the arithmetic of his sentence. He imagined his house sold to a couple who would repaint the dining room yellow and have loud laughing fights and make up before bed. He imagined the blue plate shattering. He imagined Miranda hanging a small plaque at the gallery under a painting Eleanor had loved, and everyone standing for a minute and thinking about the ways people vanish while still in the room. He imagined, with the grim humor that had never entirely left him, the line in the newspaper, "Private investigator admits to killing wife," and the comments section filling with men who had opinions about the nature of monsters and the nature of wives. He let himself grow cold with contempt, and then let the cold drain away because contempt had sustained him once and would not be allowed to again. In the quiet, he felt a thought he had not felt since the first night arranging itself like furniture in a room: gratitude. Not for the story, not for its horror, not for its shape, but for the fact that it had ended in truth. There is a mercy, small and uncompromising, in a truth finally said. He held it like a coin warmed in the hand. That evening he dreamed. He stood at the kitchen sink. Water ran. Eleanor stood across from him. She looked as she had looked in the first months, not because time is kind, but because memory is lazy and prefers symmetry. She lifted her hand and said something he could not hear. He leaned forward. The sound of water grew louder. She smiled, tiny, the smile she used when she forgave him for leaving the light on in the hallway, for forgetting to buy lemons, for being human in the small, weary ways. He woke before the dream could end wrong. He lay in the dark and breathed. In the morning, he wrote one more line in his notebook and closed it with a deliberate hand. "You finally found me," she had said in the cell, and he had understood it to mean that he had found her in the worst place. Now he allowed himself to hear another meaning curling underneath like a current under water. "You finally found me, the person I was, under the versions you made for yourself to survive the cases and the nights and the rustle of fear." He did not believe in messages from the dead. He believed in the way sentences can turn their faces to show another side, when you have suffered long enough to deserve a new angle. He stood, he faced the mirror. He did not look away.